Salam alaikum. Program Director Priya, distinguished guests, all protocol observed. It is my culture and tradition, and the tradition and culture commands me to convey my respect to His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, UAE Vice President and Prime Minister and ruler of Dubai. It is on his land that I stand before you. It's very difficult to have or to make speeches after lunch. People's tummies are full. People are talking to each other, saying how wonderful the food was. In fact, today is special. It's the first time in my life I have a lunch with no meat. To have a lunch and enjoy it with no roots, vegetable roots. I have over 50 years studied. In fact, I went to boarding school in 1970 with Indian boys and girls, and I've never heard of Jain. I've never heard of Jainism. It took me to come today to hear about this lovely lifestyle, healthy lifestyle called Jain. Now, normally, speeches are by their nature boring. They are often written by someone else, not the speaker himself. And it normally delays what the audience has come to, which is networking and chilling and having a good time. Very few speeches in history are still remembered now. One can remember President Barack Obama, his nomination to run for presidency. One may remember John F. Kennedy in Berlin when he said, "Ich bin eine Berliner." One will remember the famous speech in 1964, President Mandela in the docks, fearful of being sentenced to death by hanging, as that was the charge and the prosecutor, and it was turned into life imprisonment. So speeches are not the best form of entertainment. My father, a distinguished medical expert, was the son of a miner. He was born in 1920, died in 2003. And he said, "Don't tell us what we know. When you make a speech, don't tell us what we know. Tell us what we don't know, so that the audience leaves wiser and having learned one or two things." So I'll try and remember what he said. We shall all leave wiser. I will speak of my journey, 3 generations, a century of interconnection with India. My predecessor here on the stage spoke eloquently about the East African community and doing business with Africa. This morning, the elder statesman of United Arab Emirates, His Highness Sheikh Nahyan bin Mubarak Anagyan, in his closing statement, mentioned the importance of trade and development between the Middle East, India, and Africa. I won't elaborate on that. I will talk of this journey. I said the journey is over 100 years, over a century. In 1926, my grandfather, my mother's father, was the first African to live in an Indian suburb in Durban, South Africa. In those days, Durban was the only city that allowed Indians to come. They came from the subcontinent to come and work in the sugar plantations. But because Indians are creative and dynamic, they didn't keep to the script of their job descriptions. A century later, they're in politics, they're in academia, they're in business. Nothing is beyond them. So he moved in 1926 to the suburb. How he got to this Indian suburb, there was a merchant who had been a couple of years in Durban, and he was an orphan, and he was brought up by an old lady. And this old lady was now getting sick and fragile. He later heard that his mother wasn't well. So he decided to sell his house and make his way back to India to take care of this fragile lady who brought him up. He happened to meet, coming from Mahatma Gandhi's offices, an African man. And just in conversation, he told him that I have to leave your beautiful country and go back to India. And my grandfather asked him, are you taking your house along with you? He says, no, we all have houses here in Durban. Do you want my house? And my grandfather said, well, we're not allowed to, but since you've made the offer, I will. I'll look into it. In fact, I will move in. So he went to the Governor General, who was a British, like there were viceroys in India running the place. And he told him, he didn't ask him, he told him, he said, I'm buying a house from this family, and this man is leaving the house. It can't remain empty. And he remained there. My mother was born there and grew up there. I said we were 3 generations. That was my grandfather. My mother, in 1954, she was a guest of the Indian ambassador to the United Nations, Her Excellency, Mrs. Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit. She was the first woman President of the United Nations General Assembly. And she had heard that my mother and her family hosted over half a dozen Indian families. And we all know Indian families, it's not one child, one family. It's a couple of children, a couple of aunties and uncles. That my parents' home was a haven for this half a dozen Indian families following the racial riots of January 1949 in Durban, where the Zulus, we don't quite know, the historians have not quite got it right yet, as to what sparked the interracial fight of the Zulus, which are the predominant 95% of Africans in Durban and Natal, to fight the Indian merchants, the Indian commercial people and their houses. So they hosted. My parents hosted his families in the garage, in the garden, in tents. And Her Excellency, Mrs. Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, heard of this story and wanted to thank my mother officially. It is also worth noting that in 1945, at the San Francisco conference, the prelude to the United Nations, only one delegate stood up to the South African mission. The South African leader, who was an ally of Winston Churchill and the British during the Second World War, General Jan Smuts, the Indian ambassador took on this giant of a man who was a field marshal and told him that the treatment of Indians in South Africa was unacceptable. There were provinces, South Africa had 4 at the time, where Indians were not allowed to reside in one of the 4 provinces. They could not overnight, they could not have businesses, they had to travel from Johannesburg to Durban and no stopover. So she single-handedly reprimanded the head of the South African. Now, that was my mother. My father was a guest of the Indian Medical Association in 1976. India was hosting the Commonwealth Medical Association, and Prime Minister Indira Gandhi gave my father a special dispensation to come to New Delhi. So that's the second generation. Third generation is this young man standing here. As I previously mentioned, I went to a boarding school with Indians in South Africa, in Swaziland, Kingdom of Swaziland. And the Indian boys were so good at cricket in junior school, and it was my wish to be a member of the first team. But I couldn't make it because the Indian boys were much better. And as President Mandela said, the impossible is always possible. I did become a member of the first team by virtue of being the cricket scorer when the original cricket scorer got injured, he got sick. So there's always hope. Now, South Africa has had very strong relationship with the Indian continent. India played a pivotal role in the liberation of South Africa, in the freedom struggle, and relationships have gone from better to better over the years. It was President Mandela who said one of his loveliest state visits was when he went to India. And he said that India gave Mohandas Karamchand to the world, and South Africa gave Mahatma Gandhi to the world. Now, let us look at, in conclusion, I would like to add, as Consul General of South Africa in Dubai in the Northern Emirates, there's a big Indian expat population in the UAE and in Dubai. We want trade, we want investments, we want tourism. Right now, Indian nationals need a visa to South Africa. On my inbox is to work with government to exempt gold visas, Indian nationals living in the Gulf, living in UAE, to be exempted from visas to South Africa. I look forward to seeing the Airbus, the Boeing Emirates Airline direct flight, which we do have, to Durban, full of ladies in saris, with their children being welcomed at Durban International Airport by South Africans speaking Urdu, Hindi, and Malayalam. With that, I thank you all. May you have a lovely afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Can I please request Vimal Shah and Vipin Malu to please come on stage and felicitate sir with a token of appreciation, please. Sir, here you go. Can we have a huge round of applause once again for His Excellency?